Have you ever heard the story of the morning Johnny Depp made Steve Harvey cry? Not in some TV studio or on a big stage, but quietly, humbly, in the back of a little church in Atlanta. It sounds almost unbelievable when you first hear it. Johnny Depp, the Hollywood legend, always calm, collected, a little mysterious. And Steve Harvey, the guy who seems like nothing can shake him, always cracking jokes, always in control of the room. The idea that these two would even cross paths is surprising enough. But the idea that Johnny, of all people, could bring Steve Harvey to tears, well, that's something you don't expect to see. And yet, it happened. That morning in Atlanta was just like any other rainy Sunday. The sky was gray, heavy clouds hanging low over the city, and the streets were slick and glistening with water. There was a chill in the air. Not the kind of sharp cold that bites, but a dampness that makes you want to stay inside, wrap up in a blanket, and watch the rain fall against the window. But inside a small, warm church on a quiet corner of the city, people were gathering. There wasn't anything fancy about this place, no stained glass, no grand arches, no polished pews. Just rows of simple wooden benches, soft light filtering through tall windows, and the faint scent of coffee and old hymnals in the air. You could hear low murmurs of conversation, the shuffling of feet, the rustling of coats being removed. For most of the congregation, it was just another Sunday service. A chance to sit still for an hour, to hear some hopeful words, to maybe feel like the week ahead wouldn't be quite so hard. And that morning, like he often did when he was back home in Atlanta, Steve Harvey was there too. Steve, he's always been open about his faith. If you've ever listened to his stand-up or his radio shows or his interviews, you've probably heard him talk about it. About how he was broke once. Homeless. Sleeping in his car. And how it was his faith that kept him going. That helped him believe there was a future waiting for him on the other side of all that pain. So on this morning, Steve was there to speak. To share his story with the people who came to listen. Not as a celebrity. Not as a comedian or TV host. Just as another man who'd been down and found a way to get back up. He stood at the front, adjusting his tie, taking a deep breath before starting to speak. The room quieted. And what nobody noticed, at least not at first, was that way in the back, sitting all by himself on the very last bench, was Johnny Depp. It was easy not to notice him. He was dressed like he always is when he's not in front of cameras, kind of understated, kind of anonymous. A dark jacket. A fedora pulled low over his face. Dark sunglasses, even though it was cloudy outside. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Johnny had flown into Atlanta a few weeks earlier to shoot a film. And to say he wasn't in a good place would be putting it mildly. This was during one of the roughest chapters of his life. You probably remember, court battles. Headlines full of ugly accusations. Friends and colleagues distancing themselves. For someone who'd spent decades being adored by millions, suddenly finding himself doubted, mocked, written off, it was a kind of loneliness that not even fame can protect you from. Maybe especially fame. He'd spent most nights alone in his hotel room. Curtains drawn. Phone on silent. Wondering if all of it, his career, his reputation, his life, was just over. But then one night, someone he knew, someone who cared about him, mentioned this church. They said, "You should go. Steve Harvey sometimes preaches there when he's in town. He's got a way of talking about things. Things you might need to hear right now." And Johnny thought about it. At first he brushed it off. But when Sunday morning came, he found himself putting on his jacket, pulling on his hat, and slipping out of his hotel room quietly, before he could talk himself out of it. When he walked into the church, nobody really paid him much attention. That's how it is in places like that. You come in quiet, you take your seat, you try to open your heart to whatever's about to be said. And so he sat. Steve began to speak. He didn't tell jokes that morning. His voice was calm, but it carried a certain weight. He talked about how it feels to lose everything. About how it feels to wake up and wonder if you even matter anymore. About how it feels when the world seems to have turned its back on you. And he talked about how even then, even when you feel invisible, you're not. How someone is always watching over you. How there's always a way back. If you're willing to take the first step. And something in Johnny's chest shifted. It's hard to explain if you haven't felt it yourself, that sudden feeling that someone sees right through you. That someone is speaking directly to what you're carrying inside. He sat there, perfectly still. Hat low. Glasses hiding his eyes. But something was happening in him. When the service ended, people got up, shaking hands, heading back out into the rainy morning. But Johnny stayed seated. And when Steve finally came down from the altar, he noticed him. At first, just a flicker of recognition. Then, surprise. Imagine being Steve Harvey in that moment. You've just finished pouring your heart out, thinking you're just talking to your neighbors. And there's Johnny Depp, standing there in the back of your church. Steve smiled, extended his hand. "Brother," he said warmly. Johnny took it. Held it a little longer than you might expect. And then, he spoke. Just 6 words. "Your words saved me this week. That's all." And Steve, well. Steve lost it. You could see it in his face. The tears welling up, his big smile replaced by something deeper, quieter. He reached forward and hugged Johnny. Tight. No cameras flashing. No press release. Just a quiet moment between two men who, in that instant, understood each other perfectly. For Johnny, it was a moment of being seen again. Of realizing he wasn't completely lost after all. For Steve, it was a reminder that his words still mattered. That even when you're tired, even when you think nobody's listening, somebody always is. Later, Steve said in an interview that he almost didn't even come that morning. He'd been feeling worn out. Wondering if he was really making a difference anymore. But something, maybe faith, maybe habit, had pushed him out the door. And now he tells people, you never know who you're saving when you speak your truth. And isn't that the truth? We go through our days not realizing who we're touching, who we're helping just by showing up. Just by saying the thing someone else needed to hear. You don't have to be famous to do that. You don't have to stand at a pulpit. You don't have to have 1 million followers or a platform. You just have to care. You just have to speak. And you just have to show up. That morning in Atlanta, Johnny walked in broken. He walked out a little lighter. And Steve, he walked out reminded why he keeps showing up. And maybe that's the real point of this story. See, when Johnny walked into that little church on that rainy Sunday, he didn't expect a miracle. He didn't even expect anyone to notice him. In his mind, he was just hiding. Hiding from the world, from the noise, from the headlines screaming his name for all the wrong reasons. He'd been through weeks, months, really, of feeling like a shell of himself. Every morning he woke up, it was harder and harder to believe that he still mattered. That the man people used to love and cheer for was even still in there somewhere. Fame can be funny like that. It can lift you so high, you start thinking you're untouchable. But when the fall comes, and it always comes, it's brutal. And Johnny had fallen hard. Lawsuits. Accusations. Tabloids dissecting every detail of his life like he was nothing more than a headline to sell papers. Friends he thought would stand by him, gone. Doors that used to open wide for him, slammed shut. Even walking down the street, he felt the whispers. The stares. And though he tried to act like it didn't matter, like he didn't care what people thought, inside he felt smaller than ever. So he walked into that church not knowing what he was looking for, just knowing he couldn't stay where he was. He didn't know what he'd hear. Didn't even know if he'd stay for the whole service. He just sat there quietly in the back, like a man trying not to drown, clinging to the smallest thing he could find to hold on to. And then Steve began to speak. Steve's voice carried in that quiet room. He talked about things Johnny had almost forgotten were possible. Redemption. Second chances. He talked about how being broken didn't mean you were finished. About how the pieces of you that feel shattered can be put back together, not to be the same as before, but to be something stronger, something more beautiful. Johnny sat there, his hat low, sunglasses hiding his eyes, but his heart cracking open just a little. Because in those words, he heard himself. Heard his own story reflected back at him in a way he hadn't been able to put into words. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. By the time the service ended, Johnny didn't even know what he was going to say. He just knew he couldn't leave without letting Steve know what his words had done for him. And Steve. For Steve, it was just another Sunday. Or so he thought. What most people don't know is that Steve had been having his own doubts lately. Sure, from the outside, his life looked perfect. The suits, the smiles, the laughter, he made it look easy. But inside, he was tired. Tired of feeling like his words were falling on deaf ears. Tired of wondering if all the travel, all the effort, all the energy he put into showing up for people even made a difference anymore. He'd almost called in that morning. Almost decided to just stay home. Let someone else take his place at the pulpit. But something, maybe habit, maybe faith, maybe just that little voice inside, told him to show up anyway. And then. Johnny. That moment, when this quiet figure in the back came forward, took his hand, and said those 6 words, "Your words saved me this week," Steve felt his own walls crumble. Because that's all any of us really want, isn't it? To know that what we do matters. To know that all the pain, all the struggle, all the times we drag ourselves out of bed when we don't feel like it, that it's not for nothing. That someone, somewhere, is better off because we kept showing up. That hug they shared in front of everyone wasn't just about the two of them. It was about every single person in that room. About everyone who's ever doubted themselves. Everyone who's ever felt like giving up. Everyone who's ever wondered if they were invisible. It was a reminder. That even in your lowest moment, you still matter. That even your smallest act of kindness can ripple farther than you'll ever see. And that's really the point of this story. It's not about 2 celebrities having a dramatic moment in a church. It's about something much more human. It's about how no matter who you are, no matter how famous, how successful, how strong you seem to the world, you can still feel broken inside. You can still feel lost. And it's about how no matter how small you feel, no matter how unimportant you think you are, you still have the power to save someone else. Just by showing up. Just by speaking your truth. That morning in Atlanta, Johnny walked in carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he walked out a little lighter, because someone cared enough to speak the words he needed to hear. And Steve walked out reminded that his words, his presence, still mattered. That even when he thought nobody was listening, somebody was. And maybe, that's enough. Maybe that's all we can ever hope for. To keep showing up. To keep speaking. To keep believing that somewhere out there, someone needs what only we can give. And maybe, just maybe, one day, someone will walk up to you, look you in the eye, and say, "Your words saved me this week." And you'll realize you were never invisible after all. Maybe the lesson isn't about fame or fortune. It's about how even in your lowest moments, there's always someone out there who still sees you. And how even your smallest act of kindness, your quietest words, might just save somebody's life. So now, let me ask you something. Which part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it that Johnny even showed up at all? That he was humble enough to walk into a church and sit quietly in the back? Was it that Steve broke down in front of everyone? Showed his own vulnerability? Or was it just the simple power of 6 little words? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found something inspiring in this story, I hope you'll stick around for more. Check out our next video about the time Will Smith quietly helped a stranger when nobody was watching. That's another story you won't forget. If you liked this, go ahead and hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And ring that little bell so you don't miss the next one. Because at the end of the day, it's not about fame. It's about connection. It's about those quiet little moments that remind us what really matters. Thanks for watching. Stay kind. Stay inspired. And never forget. Even the smallest moment of connection can heal someone in ways you'll never know. See you in the next one.